Why She Hid 365. Letters Behind a Painting. The WWII love story that survived everything. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the bombed-out bookshop in Lyon, France, casting long shadows across the scattered pages that littered the floor like fallen leaves. It was here, among the remnants of burned novels and shattered dreams, that Céleste Moreau first laid eyes on the American war correspondent who would change her life forever. Your subscription is more than a click. It's what helps me keep this channel alive and growing. Thomas Bennett wasn't supposed to be in Lyon that October morning in 1943. His assignment had been to document the liberation efforts further north, but a misdirected train and a series of fortunate mishaps had deposited him in this ancient city on the Rhone River, where the autumn air still carried the acrid smell of recent bombings and the whispered promises of the resistance. Céleste was 24 then, with dark hair that caught the light like spun copper and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Mediterranean. She had been the city's head librarian before the war transformed everything she knew into something unrecognizable. Now she spent her days salvaging books from destroyed buildings, determined to preserve what fragments of culture and knowledge she could from the wreckage of her world. "Excusez-moi," Thomas had said that first morning, his French heavily accented but earnest. "I'm looking for stories worth telling." She had looked up from the manuscript she was carefully extracting from beneath a fallen beam, her fingers already stained with ink and dust. "Monsieur," she replied in careful English, recognizing his accent, "in France today every story is worth telling. The question is whether anyone is left alive to listen." Thomas was 31, tall and lean with sandy hair that refused to stay combed, and wire-rimmed glasses that had somehow survived 3 years of war reporting across Europe. He had joined the war correspondence not out of patriotic fervor, but because he believed that someone needed to document the human cost of the madness engulfing the world. His camera and his typewriter were his weapons against forgetting. Over the following weeks, as Thomas documented the quiet heroism of Lyon's civilians, he found himself returning again and again to the makeshift library Céleste had established in the basement of a half-destroyed church. She had created something beautiful from the chaos. Neat shelves lined with salvaged books, reading areas lit by candles when the electricity failed, and a small desk where she painstakingly catalogued each rescued volume. "Why do you do this?" Thomas asked her one evening, as they worked together by candlelight, his press credentials forgotten as he helped her sort through water-damaged poetry collections. Céleste paused, her hand stilled on a copy of Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal. "Because when the bombs stop falling and the soldiers go home, what we have left are the words, the stories, the proof that we were more than just victims of history." She looked up at him, and in the flickering candlelight, Thomas saw something that made his heart forget its steady rhythm. What we save now determines what future generations will know about who we really were. It was then that Thomas understood he was falling in love not just with Céleste, but with her fierce determination to preserve beauty in the face of destruction. He began to see the war through her eyes, not just as a series of battles and casualties, but as a theft of ordinary moments, of quiet evenings spent reading, of lovers walking hand in hand along the river without fear of air raids. Their courtship unfolded in stolen hours between his assignments and her salvage missions. Thomas would arrive at the library with American chocolate or coffee, luxuries that made Céleste's eyes light up like a child's on Christmas morning. She would share with him the books she had rescued, reading aloud in her musical French while he struggled to follow along, their heads bent together over pages that smelled of smoke and survival. "I never thought I would fall in love during a war," Thomas confessed one December evening, as they walked carefully through the blacked-out streets, her hand tucked securely in his arm. "Perhaps," Céleste replied thoughtfully. "Love is more necessary during war, not less. When everything else is uncertain, we need something to remind us what we're fighting to preserve." But even as their love deepened through the bitter winter of 1943, both Thomas and Céleste knew their time was limited. Thomas's editor in London was growing impatient with his extended stay in Lyon, and the resistance activities in the city were drawing increased German attention. The quiet sanctuary they had built together was becoming increasingly dangerous. The end came suddenly, as endings often did during wartime. In February 1944, Thomas received urgent orders to report to the British forces preparing for what would later be known as D-Day. He had less than 48 hours to leave Lyon, and possibly France altogether. "I don't know when I'll be back," he told Céleste as they stood in her library for what might be the last time. The candles flickered around them like prayers in the darkness. Céleste had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it, but the reality was still a physical blow. "Then we must make sure we don't lose each other," she said, with a composure that surprised them both. "We must write. Every day. No matter where you are or what is happening, you must tell me about it, and I will do the same." Thomas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of old books and vanilla that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. "I promise," he whispered against her hair, "every single day." And so began what would become the most extraordinary correspondence of their lives. Thomas's first letter reached Céleste 3 weeks after his departure, postmarked from a location he couldn't name, but that she guessed was somewhere along the English Channel. It was written on Red Cross stationery, and bore the careful marks of military censorship, but his voice came through clearly. "My dearest Céleste, I am somewhere cold and wet, surrounded by soldiers who speak of home with the same longing I feel when I think of your library. I have tried to describe to my colleagues the woman who saves books from burning buildings, but words seem inadequate. How do you explain someone who creates light in darkness? I carry with me the copy of Verlaine you gave me, and each night before sleep I read the poem you marked, Il pleure dans mon cœur, comme il pleut sur la ville. It rains in my heart as it rains on the city. I understand now why you chose it. Write to me of the books you save, of the candles you light, of the ordinary moments that prove we are still human. These details will keep me sane in the madness ahead. All my love." Thomas. Céleste's response, written on precious paper she had bartered for with a can of American peaches Thomas had left behind, was equally careful and passionate. "Mon cher Thomas, your letter arrived like a gift from another world. I have read it so many times that I have memorized each word, each careful phrase that slipped past the censors. The library grows daily. Yesterday, I found a complete set of Victor Hugo's works in the ruins of the old municipal building. The volumes were scattered across 3 floors, but miraculously intact. I spent the entire day gathering them, thinking of how you would have helped me carry them home. Now they sit on our shelf. Yes, I think of it as ours still, waiting for readers who may never come. I have begun teaching some of the neighborhood children to read, using the picture books I've collected. Their laughter in the basement of our church is perhaps the most revolutionary sound in Lyon. Yesterday, little Marie asked me if the Americans in the books look like you. I told her that some do, and that the best of them carry cameras instead of guns. I think of you every morning when I light the first candle, and every evening when I blow out the last. Write to me of your world, even the parts you cannot name. Avec tout mon amour, Céleste." Through the spring and summer of 1944, their letters became lifelines thrown across the chaos of war. Thomas wrote from training camps in England, from the beaches of Normandy in the aftermath of D-Day, from the liberated streets of Paris. His letters painted pictures of exhausted soldiers sharing cigarettes in foxholes, of French villages celebrating freedom with wine hidden since 1940, of the terrible beauty of sunrise over battlefields where young men had died for causes they barely understood. Céleste's letters chronicled a different kind of war, the quiet heroism of civilians learning to survive. She wrote of the woman who shared her last egg with a neighbor's sick child, of the priest who sheltered Jewish refugees in the church crypt below her library, of the teenager who bicycled 50 kilometers to trade family silver for medicine. Her words carried the scent of wood smoke and determination, of a world learning to rebuild itself even as the fighting continued. But it was not just the grand gestures they shared. Thomas wrote of the British soldier who kept a pressed flower from his girlfriend's garden in his helmet, of the way morning light looked different when filtered through the smoke of war. Céleste described the cat that had adopted her library, the way autumn leaves still fell in patterns beautiful enough to break your heart, the sound of rain on the church roof during the quiet hours when she worked alone. As 1944 turned into 1945, their letters became more urgent, more intimate. The war was clearly ending, But what that meant for their future remained terrifyingly uncertain. Thomas had been reassigned again, this time to the Pacific Theater. The possibility that he might be sent to fight in Japan, that the war might continue for years more, hung over every word they wrote. Céleste, Thomas wrote from a transport ship in the Atlantic, I dream of your library every night. I dream of reading to you by candlelight, of helping you organize the books by subject, of kissing you in the poetry section where no one can see us. These dreams are more real to me than the ship beneath my feet or the ocean stretching endlessly in all directions. I have covered this war from England to France to Italy, and now perhaps to Japan. I have seen the worst that humans can do to each other, but also the best. I have learned that love is not a luxury we indulge in during peacetime. It is the reason we survive wartime. You are my reason, Céleste. You are why I remember that there is something worth preserving in this world. When this is over, and it will end, my darling, it must, I want to help you build not just a library but a life. I want to learn French well enough to read Baudelaire without stumbling over the pronunciation. I want to drink coffee with you on Sunday mornings and argue about which books deserve a place on our shelves. I want to marry you in your church, surrounded by the books we saved together. But first, I need you to do something for me. I need you to promise me that you will keep these letters, all of them. Hide them somewhere safe, somewhere they will survive even if we don't. Someday, when historians write about this war, I want them to find our words. I want them to know that in the middle of all this destruction, two people found something worth creating. I want our love to be part of the permanent record. Céleste received this letter on a cold February morning in 1945, just days after she had learned of the liberation of the concentration camps. The horror of what had been happening, even as she and Thomas had been writing their love letters, left her speechless for hours. When she finally found the strength to respond, her words carried a new urgency. Thomas, your letter came on the same day we learned the truth about the camps. I cannot write of love while children were being murdered. I cannot speak of our future while families were being destroyed. Yet perhaps that is exactly when love becomes most necessary, when the world reveals its capacity for unspeakable evil. We must respond with whatever goodness we can create. I will keep your letters, my darling. I will hide them where no bombing, no fire, no conquering army can destroy them. But more than that, I will keep the promise they represent. When you come home, not if, but when, we will build something together that proves beauty can survive anything. I have found the perfect hiding place. Behind the painting of Saint Joan that hangs above the altar in our church, there is a hollow space in the wall. The priest, Father Bennett, showed it to me yesterday. During the Revolution, the nuns hid their most precious manuscripts there. Now I will hide our most precious words. Come home to me, Thomas. Come home to our library, our life, our future. I will be here, surrounded by our books and our letters, keeping the light burning. Je t'aime pour toujours, Céleste, but Thomas never received Céleste's final letter. His ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine in the South Pacific on March 15, 1945, just weeks before the war in Europe officially ended. The attack came at dawn, splitting the transport vessel in two and sending most of its passengers into the dark, cold water with no hope of rescue. Thomas had time for one last thought as the ship went down around him. And it was not of the stories he would never write, or the war he would never see end. It was of Céleste in her library, lighting candles in the darkness, saving whatever could be saved from the wreckage of the world. He hoped she would remember him that way, not as another casualty of war, but as someone who had tried to preserve the stories worth telling. The news of Thomas's death reached Céleste through official channels 6 weeks later. The Red Cross telegram was brief and impersonal. Regret to inform you that Thomas Bennett, war correspondent, was killed in action, March 15, 1945. Personal effects will be forwarded when possible. For 3 days, Céleste did not speak. She continued her work in the library, lighting the candles each morning and extinguishing them each night, but she moved like a sleepwalker through familiar routines that had suddenly lost all meaning. Father Bernard found her on the 4th morning, sitting in the poetry section with Thomas's letters spread around her like fallen petals. I promised him I would hide them, she said without looking up. He wanted our story to survive, even if we didn't. That afternoon, Céleste carefully arranged all 365 of Thomas's letters, one for each day they had been apart, in chronological order. She wrapped them in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture, then placed them in a wooden box that had once held communion wine. With Father Bernard's help, she created a small cavity behind the painting of Saint Joan, just large enough to hold their correspondence. "Why Saint Joan?" Father Bernard asked as they carefully positioned the painting back in place. Céleste smoothed her hand over the painted surface, touching the saint's upturned face. "Because she knew what it meant to fight for something larger than yourself. Because she understood that some things are worth dying for, and some things are worth living for, and sometimes they're the same thing." The war in Europe ended 6 weeks later, on May 8, 1945. Céleste joined the celebrations in Lyon streets, but her joy was tempered by the knowledge that Thomas would never see the peace they had both dreamed of. She continued her work in the library, which officially reopened as part of the city's reconstruction efforts. She never married, though she received several proposals over the years. When people asked her why she remained alone, she would simply say that she had already found her great love, and lightning never strikes the same place twice. For 67 years, the letters remained hidden behind the painting. Céleste grew old in Lyon, becoming a beloved figure in the city's literary community. She trained new librarians, organized reading programs for children, and quietly funded the preservation of historical documents throughout the region. She never spoke publicly of Thomas or their wartime correspondence, but those close to her noticed that she always kept a small photograph on her desk, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle smile standing next to a stack of books. When Céleste died in 2012 at the age of 93, Father Bernard's successor, a young priest named Father Michel, was tasked with renovating the old church. As workers carefully removed the painting of Saint Joan for restoration, they discovered the hidden cavity and its precious contents. The letters, perfectly preserved in their oiled cloth wrapping, told a story that captivated historians and romantics alike. Here was documented proof of how ordinary people had loved and hoped and dreamed during humanity's darkest hour. Thomas's careful observations of wartime life, combined with Céleste's intimate portraits of civilian survival, created a unique dual perspective on World War II that scholars had never seen before. But beyond their historical value, the letters revealed something even more precious, evidence of love's capacity to transcend the worst circumstances imaginable. In words written on scrounged paper and sent across dangerous distances, two people had created something beautiful enough to last for generations. The letters are now housed in the Lyon Municipal Archives, where researchers and visitors can read them by appointment. A small plaque outside the renovated church commemorates Thomas and Céleste's story, and the library Céleste built in the church basement has been preserved as a historical site. Perhaps most remarkably, the final letter in the collection was not from Thomas to Céleste, but from Céleste to posterity. She had written it on the day she hid the others, knowing that someday someone would find them. To whoever discovers these letters, you hold in your hands the proof that love survives everything: war, separation, loss, even death itself. Thomas and I were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, but what we created together was neither ordinary nor extraordinary. It was simply true. We wrote these words because we needed each other to know that we continued to exist, even when continents and armies separated us. We saved them because we believed that the act of loving, fully and without reservation, was itself a form of resistance against all the forces that would diminish our humanity. If you are reading this, then our resistance succeeded. Our love outlasted the war, the bombs, the years, and even us. In the end, that may be the only victory that matters. Keep these words safe, as I have kept them safe. Let them remind you that even in the darkest times, there are always people lighting candles in the darkness, saving what can be saved, loving as fiercely as they know how. That is our gift to you, the certainty that love persists, that words endure, that somewhere in the world there are always libraries where the light still burns. With gratitude for your witness to our story, Céleste Moreau, Lyon, France, 1945 to 2012. Today, scholars still study the letters for their insights into wartime life, but most visitors come for a different reason. They come to read about two people who found each other in the middle of a war and refused to let anything, not distance, not danger, not even death, diminish what they had created together. In the end, Céleste had been right. The stories we save determine what future generations know about who we really were. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, those stories prove that in our finest moments, we were people capable of extraordinary love. The letters behind the painting had survived everything, just as Thomas had hoped they would, just as Céleste had promised they would, just as love itself endures, long after the last candle has been blown out and the final page has been turned.